Good morning. This is going to be a little bit different what we're doing today. I think that we need to, well, first of all, I'm always very kind of upset because Black History is only like for 1 month. It's just relegated to February. But as a people, we need to know more about the trailblazers and the kinds of things they've gone through, especially our children. And the guest we have today is just that, a trailblazer that has built a path for the future people coming in the STEM areas. So, in 1957, our guest speaker achieved the second highest SAT score in the country in mathematics. A pioneer she was a pioneer in our country in mathematics. She was the first Black female to graduate from the University of Pittsburgh School of Engineering. And there is currently research into the probability that she was the first African-American female in the nation to earn a degree in aeronautical aerospace engineering. She worked for 10 years as an aerospace engineer at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. She received a master's degree in mathematics from the University of Dayton, a doctor's degree in mathematics from the University of Cincinnati, and a Master of Theological Studies from Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. A retired professor from the University of Pittsburgh Mathematics Department, she has often been referred to as Pittsburgh's hidden figure. In 2018, she was inducted into the Heinz History Makers Museum, which is an affiliate of the Smithsonian Institute. Now, I've spoken of some of her accomplishments. Now I'd like to speak a little bit about who she is. She is a pillar in the community, respected by young and old alike. She loves teaching, but especially teaching the very young. She is honest, loyal, and compassionate. She's a fighter. She's tenacious and patient. She is a mother of two, grandmother of two, and a proud new great-grandmother of one. Last and most important, she never lost the common touch. I am pleased to introduce to my EWC brothers and sisters, my sister, Dr. Elayne Arrington. Good morning, EWC. All right, I guess it's afternoon now. Good afternoon, EWC. I am very pleased to be here with you today, this fifth Sabbath in July. And I'm thankful to Dr.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, you're right. Can you hear me, EWC? Yes. All right. I'm very pleased to be here with you this fifth Sabbath in July. I'm thankful to Dr. Maxine Collins for her kind invitation to join you today and for her communication. And, of course, to my sister, Catherine Cornwall, for her just being my sister and her innovative introduction. And, of course, to you for your audience. Now, Catherine has spoken to me about you for years, and I'm happy that I finally got to witness in person the wonderful praise and worship service that she's often spoken to me about. And of course, this morning, I'm especially glad to see the several young people that I saw in attendance. And maybe first I'd like to just say one word to them. As Catherine said, I'm Dr. Elayne Arrington from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I'm retired now. But as she told you, I worked for some years as an engineer at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, and then 45 years as a mathematics professor at the University of Pittsburgh, or we like to call it Pitt, where I'm from. You know, engineers design and build things that are meant to solve problems and make life better for people. They use math and science. Aerospace engineers design and build aircraft, space shuttles, missiles, satellites, and rockets. Mathematics professors teach advanced mathematics courses and create new mathematics to help solve problems. To become an engineer, I took all the math and science courses offered in high school, and I studied engineering for 4 years at the University of Pittsburgh. To become a math professor, I studied a lot of mathematics in college to get a master's degree and then a doctor's degree. So to you young people, I say learn as much as you can in all your subjects so that you will know what you like best and what you can do best. And then hopefully you will decide to take a job that you can do well and that you also like. You know, my biggest challenge 65 years ago was that most people thought that girls and women could not be successful engineers and mathematicians. My biggest obstacle was to prove that I could indeed be those things by getting the best grades in my mathematics and engineering courses. Now, would the young people please stand so I can see you particularly? Okay. Yes, well, I'm glad to see you. And what grades are you in? Oh, up there too. All right, young people who are working. What grades are you in? What grade are you in? Pardon me?
I'm going to 7th.
Okay. What grade are, I saw someone behind you. What grade are you in? Okay. What grade are you in? Okay. 8th? That's a good grade. And what about you? What grade are you in? Okay. And what grade is the little one in? 2nd. Okay, 2nd. What grade are you in up there? Okay. Oh, yes, I missed them over there. What grade are you in? Okay. Yeah, what grade is the little man in? Okay. Do you know what you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be? Don't know yet? What about you? And a medical doctor. Uh-huh. Any particular kind of practice you'd like to do? Or just you'll find it later, or you know now? Okay. Good. What would you like to be? Okay. Okay. You have time to make up your mind. And what would you like to be over here? Okay. Okay, when I started school, you know, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. But I liked all my school subjects, especially mathematics. And by the time that I was in 4th grade, I knew that I wanted to be an engineer because they had built things that helped to end World War II. And when World War II ended, my father came home. So that gave me a good reason to want to be an engineer. And of course, I know all you young people know what a giant is. And what happens if you stand on the shoulders of a giant? All right, if you stand on the shoulders of a giant, you're going to be able to see further, aren't you? And I'm sure you probably have heard of gravity and heard that Isaac Newton is credited with the discovery of gravity. Now, one of my favorite quotes is by Isaac Newton. It is that if I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. And to the young people here, I encourage you in all you do, even in your spiritual things, to stand on the shoulders of giants. If you look around you, you will see spiritual giants, people who have advanced knowledge and experience in spiritual and other things. And if you stand on their shoulders, if you make use of the knowledge and the advancement of those who have come before you, you'll find that, like Newton, you will be able to see further and to be able to do more. Now, as you all can see, I am a black female. And historically, we black female have suffered from intersectionality. That is the stacking or compounding of biases or burdens or barriers. And my own personal story is that of a 65+ year journey from a student to a retired professional in the face of intersectionality. And my personal experience was intensified by my aspiration to be an engineer and then a mathematician, 2 fields in which people of color, and especially women, are woefully underrepresented. Now, I like to tell my story in episodes that I call the stories of my life. And several of these episodes are written in the cover story of the fall 2020 edition of Pitt magazine, and I think you in your folder have a copy of that cover story. So today I wish to share with you first several episodes in my story, then the personal impact of my story, and finally the aftermath of that story. So my message to you today takes not the form of a sermon, but rather that of a narrative or even a friendly chat. However, I do consider my story biblically based on the 37th Psalm, verses 23 and 24, which begin in my own rewording. The steps of a good woman are ordered by the Lord. And my story takes place over a long period of time, so I think that you need to be aware of a disclaimer. In listening to it, you have to be aware of anachronism, and that is the imposing of the concepts of one time period onto another period. And also, there are 2 episodes that I usually tell because I think they're foundational. So the heart of my story begins, as my sister said, in 1957. 1957 was quite a year for me. I attended Homestead Senior High School, which is now known as Steel Valley Area High School. And Dr. Albert Quick from the University of Pittsburgh, he was the registrar. He came to my school to interview the top students to award one of us a University of Pittsburgh honor scholarship, which paid half tuition. One of my teachers, Miss McGuire, told me that he liked to embarrass students, that he never gave the scholarship to anyone who cried, and he hated long fingernails. So I cut my fingernails and I resolved not to cry. Now the student before me came out of the interview room crying, and Dr. quickly attacked me when I went into the room. He attacked me on the spelling of my name. He said sometimes he saw it with a Y, sometimes he saw it with an I, and he saw it both ways. But how did I even expect to graduate from Pitt if I didn't even know how to spell my own name? So I didn't cry, and I got ready to answer. But before I could answer, he looked at my SAT scores, and then he started to talk about what I could expect to do when I went to Pitt. And he seemed very pleased that I wanted to be an engineer. Now, I found out later that I had gotten the second highest SAT score in math in the country that year, and that I was also, that was, okay, thank you, and that I was a National Merit Scholar. But you have to beware of anachronism here, because that was a time when there was no preparation for the SATs. There was no PSAT, and you didn't take it in your junior year and then think, well, I can improve in my senior year. In those days, we took the SAT cold, and you just went, and what you did, that was it. Well, in 1957, I graduated first in my high school class, but that year, the valedictory message was given by the class president, who was a white male. Also in 1957, right at the end of the high-level bridge, it was called then, it's now called the Homestead Graves Bridge, there was the Mesta Machine Company, one of the top 500 American companies at the time. Now, each year, Mesta awarded a scholarship to a mechanical engineering student at Pitt. I received a letter from Pitt stating that because I had the best academic record of the incoming freshmen, I was going to receive the Mesta Machine Scholarship. And my honor scholarship would be replaced by the Mesta Scholarship, which was much better. It paid full tuition, you had an allowance for books, and you had a living allowance. But within a week, I received another letter from Pitt stating that Mesta was not going to give me the scholarship. They reserved the right to approve the recipient, and because girls didn't finish engineering school, they said, they chose to give it to a male. So the Mesta Machine Scholarship was rescinded, my honor scholarship was reinstated, and I had most of my classes with a young man who bragged about the great scholarship he got from Mesta. And you know, I guess I was kind of young then because I really resented him for that. But now I realize it wasn't his fault. Well, all National Merit Scholars were granted scholarships to complete their first year's tuition. And the Society of Women Engineers awarded me a scholarship that paid the other half of Pitt's tuition for my last 3 years there. But here again, you have to beware of anachronism, because it wasn't until 1958, after the Soviets had launched Sputnik, that the federal student loans and grants and scholarships were first offered under the National Defense Education Act. It was done in order to help the United States compete with other countries, and especially the Soviet Union. And before that, universities granted scholarships to athletes and to true scholars. Now, I usually tell those two episodes or stories because they are representative of how my journey begins, and really about the highs and lows that I felt along the way. And as you will see as I continue, those two stories now have sequels. Now, as I said, 1957 was quite a year for me. It seems that 1957 was the year in which the time had come for there to be a black female engineer at Pitt, and also the time for the space age. On September 3rd, 1957, I entered the University of Pittsburgh, School of Engineering, Mechanical Department, Aeronautical option. On October 4th that year, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, an artificial satellite that orbited the Earth, and the space age, the space race began. Now, as a girl, in Homeville Junior High School, I took 2 semesters of home economics, consisting of cooking and sewing, while the boys took shop and mechanical drawing. As a freshman at Pitt, I had to take a mechanical drawing course, and of course, cooking and sewing had not given me any preparation for that engineering drawing course. The first day of class, the instructor told me that I would never be able to draw because my fingernails were too long, and I would never be an engineer because other girls had come up there, but none had ever finished engineering. Well, I was used to doing everything with long fingernails, and in a couple of weeks with a lot of practice, I was a pretty good drawer, and I was always an excellent letterer. Now, one day, I was late to drawing class. The assignment was to draw a machine that had an appendage consisting of a right circular cylinder sliced at an angle by a plane. When I turned the drawing in the next week, the instructor looked at me in surprise. Before I had arrived at class the week before, he had told the class to cut the drawing off below the slice in the cylinder because we didn't know how to determine the appropriate projection. But I had used analytic geometry to, decide the correct ellipse that I should draw there, and I had completed the entire drawing. And when he saw it, he was just amazed. Now, I had that instructor for thermodynamics and a couple of other courses after that, and he never doubted me after that. But I'd have to say that during 1957 to 1961, my years at Pitt, I just had one female instructor, and I heard the term girl used many times in a condescending or distasteful manner. Now, because of civil rights advancements, racial discrimination was probably illegal, and at least I know it was socially unacceptable, but gender bashing was not. And there were a lot of things that were just done against females. And in order to succeed in spite of race and gender, I had to accept a culture that often made me feel isolated and ignored. And in my engineering courses, I had no one to work with, I had no one to talk to. I had to, by myself, try to do as much as they were able to accomplish together. And I guess that's what we call marginalization. And that, above all things, was what I sincerely hoped that no one after me would ever have to experience. But in May of 1961, I became the first black female to graduate from Pitt's engineering school, and I went to work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, in the Foreign Technology Division, which is now known as the National Air and Space Intelligence Center. I went there as their first female aerospace engineer. There in the performance branch, I used top secret reconnaissance data to work backwards and determine the capabilities of foreign, mostly Soviet aircraft. As I stated before, Sputnik 1 was launched on October 4th, 1957. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin of the Soviet Union orbited the Earth in April 1961. Alan Shepard of the United States completed a partial orbit of the Earth in May 1961, and in February 1962, John Glenn orbited the Earth 3 times. So the initial phase of the space race paralleled my stay at the University of Pittsburgh and my early years at Wright-Patt. Well, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon on June 20th, 1969, so I kind of celebrated that about 9 days ago. And in 1983, Sally Ride became the first American woman, and Guion Stewart Bluford, an aerospace engineer from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, became the first African American to fly in outer space. And both of them orbited on the shuttle Challenger. In the meantime, my graduate studies had led me to a passion for mathematics. Now, as a child, I loved Sunday school, and I attended regularly. As a young adult, I'd have to say I attended church sporadically, but still I felt that God had a purpose for me. Especially, I felt this when I was in graduate school. One incident there has always resonated with me. When I was a PhD student in mathematics, I was required to pass preliminary examinations in which I had to demonstrate a knowledge of all of mathematics in general, and then to pass comprehensive exams in which I demonstrated advanced knowledge in 2 areas of mathematics. And beware the anachronism here too, because I also had to pass a foreign language test, and I think I chose French as my foreign language. Now, many students feared the comprehensive exams because the failure rate was more than 50%. On Thursday, the night before I was to take my comprehensive exams, I heard the voice of the Lord say, "You will pass the exams tomorrow." Well, the next morning, as my husband was driving me from Dayton to Cincinnati, we had car trouble, and we had to stop for repairs. I called the math department at the University of Cincinnati, and I was told that since I would be late, I did not have to take the exams that day, that I could wait until Monday. My husband thought it was a good idea because then I could study for another weekend. But I remembered the words of the Lord, and I remembered that I was guaranteed to pass that exam on Friday, not Monday. So I figured the car was almost repaired, so I told the secretary that I would continue my journey and that I would take the exams that afternoon. When I submitted my paper, I knew that it was perfect and that all I had to do was wait for the letter stating that I had passed. I learned then the importance of attention, not only to the Word of God, but also to the words of God. And then in 1974, I became the 17th African American female to earn a doctorate in mathematics, and I returned to the University of Pittsburgh as a mathematics professor. Now, this part of my story from 1957 to 1974 has had a definite impact on the rest of my life. Well, in attending a homecoming banquet at Pitt, around about 1980, I guess it was, I sat down at a table, and as is the custom, I announced Elayne Arrington, Engineering, 1961. In a little while, I looked up, and a group of about 7 or 8 younger women surrounded me and sat at my feet. They were all black female graduates of the engineering school, and they wanted to hear my story. They thanked me for for me enduring the ordeal that I had had to suffer. They said that they knew how difficult things were for them, and they knew that they must have been so much more difficult for me. And they thanked me for being an inspiration to them. And for the first time, I realized that I had an impact on more young females than I ever would have imagined. You know, and to tell you the truth, I think I felt like Miss Jane Pittman. Now, is there anybody here who knows anything about Miss Jane Pittman? All right. Okay, probably the older people. But, you know, well, maybe I have time to tell you something about Miss Jane Pittman, because that was, when I graduated, was 1974. But in 1974, virtually every African American alive watched as the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman aired on CBS for 2 hours, and that was 3 years before Roots. But it was aired with no interruptions except one 10-minute commercial break. And it won it won several Emmys, and one of them was for Best Actress of the Year by Cicely Tyson. And it was a powerful story, and one of female endurance and resilience. It was in the genre of the slave narrative, also in the form of flashbacks. And it is a searching portrayal of life of a black woman living in the Deep South from the end of the Civil War to 1962, the middle of the Civil Rights Movement, when she was 110 years old. Now, Jimmy, who is a protagonist in the story, was a young civil rights activist, and he wanted to stage a march on the courthouse in which he had a young black girl drink from the whites-only fountain. Now, Miss Jane tried to tell him that their town wasn't ready for such a march, but Jimmy decided to go ahead and do it anyway. And in the aftermath of his actions, the young girl was arrested and Jimmy was killed. And when they killed her, Jimmy, Miss Jane decided to go to the courthouse herself. And I don't think that there was a dry eye in Black America when she, by herself, at the age of 110, walked up the long walk from the street to the courthouse and took a sip of water out of that whites-only fountain. So that's what I remember about Miss Jane Pittman. Probably those who remember that particular scene, and those of you who are too young, I just tried to tell you a little bit about what it was. Well, you know, if I had known that NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, would accept female astronauts, I probably would have remained in engineering rather than to go to be a math professor. And knowing my feelings, when there was the 1985 Teacher in Space project, my daughter Karen got me an application to apply. And I started to go to the engineering department at Pitt to get help in planning a space project. I was going to do something on celestial mechanics and Chebyshev's polynomials. But finally, I acknowledged that they were looking for a true public school teacher, not a frustrated astronaut, and I did not submit the application. So you can imagine how I felt on January 28, 1986, when the shuttle Challenger exploded 73 seconds after takeoff. And I just thought, there, except for the grace of God, would have been me. But in 1992, aboard the Endeavour, Mae Jemison became the first African-American woman in space. Now, about 7 years ago, things started happening for me pretty rapidly. In October of 2016, I received an email from the National Society of Women Engineers inviting me to be the keynote speaker when they joined the Pittsburgh chapter for the inaugural Women Engineers local event to take place at the Omni William Penn Hotel in Pittsburgh on February 16th to 18th, 2017. Now, it was a great affair. It had over 500 attendees. Now, I accepted because it seemed like an offer that was too good to refuse. Still, I wondered who had recommended me. But I was told by the national chairperson, Vanessa Valesco, that she had found me herself. And I just wondered how much she had to look to find me, because it had been a while since I had worked as an engineer and I was a mathematics professor. But on February 9th, 2017, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette article by Robert Hill, who was a former vice provost at Pitt, was published, identifying me as one of Pittsburgh's hidden figures. And I have a copy of that article in the folder you received. Now, that particular article was the catalyst for many of the events that subsequently occurred. On February 18th, the Society of Women Engineers released the Pittsburgh Business Times article, Pioneer Role Model for the Next Generation, calling me a trailblazer for women engineers. And I gave my keynote address at the William Penn Omni. And copies of that magazine article were given to all participants at the conference. The next week, I was the keynote speaker for Black History Month at the University of Pittsburgh Swanson School of Engineering, and they honored me for my priority in engineering, the first Black female engineering graduate. I was told that 2 days later, there was to be a distinguished alumnus banquet at which a Black female engineering graduate who was the president of an aerospace company would be specially recognized. Now, I really wanted to meet that person. I didn't have a ticket or a reservation, but on my way home from an important meeting, very uncharacteristically, I decided to just stop by that banquet. And those in charge were very hospitable. They gave me a seat at the table with the guests of honor. And lo and behold, I knew her. She had been one of my students more than 30 years ago when she was earning a master's degree in mathematics and one in engineering at the same time. So Dr. Wanda Austin told me that I had been an inspiration for her, a role model that she would never forget. So I especially treasure all the years in which I was the only full-time Black faculty person in the mathematics department at the University of Pittsburgh. In March of 2017, I led a panel discussion on the movie Hidden Figures at the University of Pittsburgh, along with a representative from NASA and a distinguished professor of mechanical engineering from Pitt, where the movie was shown. Then in June of that year, I received the University of Pittsburgh African American Alumni Council's Distinguished Alumnus Award for far-reaching professional accomplishments and contributions to the community. My sister Catherine and many of my family and friends attended that ceremony. In May of 2018, I had the great honor of being recognized as a Heinz History Maker by the Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh. Now, the Heinz History Center is an affiliate of the Smithsonian Institute. It was a black tie, $500 a person event, and Catherine, my daughters, and a few friends were able to share that moment with me. Now, as a bit of irony, one day I was crossing the Homestead Grays Bridge, going to the library in Homestead to copy some things to give to the History Center for my presentation. And I was concentrating on that, but I thought I saw my image on a huge billboard at the end of the bridge. It turned out that I was right. My huge image was there announcing my upcoming honor. And just ironically, that giant billboard is right over the place where the Machine Company used to be. So I had a little bit of pleasure in that. And then also in June of that year, I was the commencement speaker at Steel Valley High School and honored as a distinguished alumnus. And of course, you recall that that is the name of the school that had denied me the opportunity to speak as valedictorian. And I tried to give a message that I might have given to my classmates 61 years earlier if they had allowed me to give the valediction. From September of 2018 to February of 2019, I was so pleased to be included in the Smithsonian Apollo Moon exhibition at the Heinz History Center in preparation for the 50th anniversary of Neil Armstrong's walk on the moon. In May of 2019, I was the proud recipient of the Negro Emergency Education Drive, or NEED, Lifetime Achievement Award. In July of that year, when Hidden Figures was shown at the Carnegie Science Center in Pittsburgh, I spoke to introduce the film. Now, I was 76 years old in October of 2016 when I received that invitation from the National Society of Women Engineers. So these experiences have been unexpected, and they have been delightful but humbling, and they have left me feeling uncovered as if I am no longer hidden. But I can tell you that these experiences have convinced me that some things are best accomplished when one is young and best appreciated when one is old. As I look back at that part of the entire journey, I see it all as a matter of the 3 C's: curriculum, culture, and community. To succeed, you must be able to master the curriculum. You should challenge the culture, especially if it's sexist or racist, and you should embrace the community. You will need and welcome the support of those you know who know you and wish you well. That has always been one of the staples of my life. One of the things I knew I could depend on: my family, my friends. I always had the embracing of the community that I embraced. And I know that part of embracing the community is being a role model. I know that I did not have one, but if I had known her, no doubt Catherine Coleman Goebel Johnson, who calculated the orbital mechanics for John Glenn and Neil Armstrong as she worked at NASA for 33 years, would have been my role model. She was portrayed by Taraji P. Henson in the movie Hidden Figures. In 2015, President Barack Obama awarded Johnson the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And 2019, she was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal by the United States Congress. Katherine Johnson died in 2020 in Newport News, Virginia, at the age of 101. Now, as I have mentioned before, these things were humbling, and in many ways, they seem to be a fitting conclusion or climax to my journey. But there is an aftermath that I feel is worth telling. In May of 2021, at the age of 81, I earned a Master of Theological Studies degree from the Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. And in doing so, I was the recipient of the Middlesex Memorial Prize in Biblical Studies. And I like to say that in doing so, I went from infinity to divinity. All right. Now, way back in 1987, when I went to Oxford University in England to study mathematics, I also went to visit Paris, France. And there at the Centre Pompidou, I met a young man fresh from Benin. As he matured, I visited him several times in France. He got married, and he and his children have visited me several times in Pittsburgh. He would tell me that I must come to Africa and let him show me around so that I could see how the common people lived and not stay in a hotel. Now, as you can see, I'm having a lot of problems with mobility, but one of the things on my bucket list was to visit my friend, not in France, but in Africa. And in the summer of last year, I was able to do just that with the help of a first cousin who happens to be 20 years younger than I am. And to top it all off, I received a letter of invitation from the University of Obambi-Calavi in Cotonou to visit and meet with the governing authorities and to negotiate partnerships between their polytechnical school with the Swanson School of Engineering at Pitt and the Department of Mathematics at Pitt. And it was, for me, a marvelous trip. They treated me as if I were the queen of a small country. Now, I just had a birthday 6 months ago, so I'm now 83 years old, and I'm looking forward to the next step on my journey, convinced more than ever that the steps of a good woman are ordered by the Lord. These steps have led me to more than I could ever have imagined. In several of his speeches and sermons, Martin Luther King Jr. paraphrased words that were spoken a century earlier by Theodore Parker when he spoke of the long arc of the moral universe bending toward justice. I am thankful that my 83 years have allowed me to witness some of that bending. It has been good to learn that these years have allowed me to be an inspiration, a motivation, and a role model to some. These years have been a journey that has made me realize that sometimes unexpected turns that seem like detours were right on course with my divine destiny. Emmanuel, I have been pleased to be here and to share these thoughts with you because I consider you part of my community. And I thank you for inviting me here this afternoon. I thank you because I felt that you embraced me. And I believe that the Lord has led me here, for the steps of a good woman are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in her way. Though she falls, she shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholds her with his hand. Again, Emmanuel, I thank you for your audience.